A new documentary by legendary filmmaker Ken Burns is examining the life of Muhammad Ali. CBS News special correspondent and host of the NFL Today, James Brown, spoke with Burns about the new film.
First of all, he's the most important athlete of the 20th century. I could make an argument if we were sitting on a bar stool that he's the greatest athlete of all time. His life, though, intersects with all the themes of the last half of the 20th century, the role of sports in society, the nature of a black athlete, the definition of black masculinity and black manhood, the civil rights movement, not as a one thing, but as a multidimensional changing thing. Of course, the age-old question, American question of race, politics, war, faith, religion, sex. His story is one of freedom. It's very difficult for a black man in America to achieve the kind of freedom he did, and it's a freedom that he never forgot. He didn't leave anybody behind. It's one of courage, not just inside the ring. And then, of course, it's about love. This is the four-letter word that the FCC lets us talk about on PBS. We wanted to do the beginning to the end, from his birth and boyhood in segregated Jim Crow, Louisville, Kentucky, to his death just 5 years ago, 2016, in Phoenix, just outside of Phoenix, from Parkinson's disease, and everything in between.
1968, that meeting in Cleveland, iconic black figures. Here's a 25-year-old Muhammad Ali going to have them allegedly convince him he should go into the army.
Right.
And he comes away 25 years of age with these iconic figures, and they, to a man, said, we go along with what he's decided to do.
Bill Russell said it best. You're at, JB, it's just so right. You know, you've got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, you've got Jim Brown, you have others. They're there to sort of find out who this guy is, and they're carrying a backroom offer from the LBJ administration about how he can have a cushy, thing in the military. He's not going to have it. And Bill Russell at the end said, I'm not worried about him. I'm just worried about the rest of us.
Why was he so forthright, bold in that particular time versus having taken so long for athletes of today to feel more comfortable doing it, because there seems to be a widespread comfort enabling them to be more bold?
Well, I think they're all standing on his shoulders. They have his example always to look up to. Nobody risked as much as he did. He said, I'd face a firing squad rather than go against my faith. And he lost 3.5 years of the height of his professional powers. Now, Colin Kaepernick hasn't thrown a football professionally in a televised game in a long time, but he still got a Nike deal. Muhammad Ali lost everything. They were dipping into his second wife Belinda's college savings in order to pay the bills. I mean, this is real sacrifice. I made a film on Jack Johnson, who was the first African-American heavyweight champion. Jack Johnson was just for himself. Muhammad Ali was for everybody. He's for me, too, as a kid growing up. I loved him. I was invested in this man, and every day of this production, 6 or 7 years, was a daily unlearning of the conventional wisdom I had and the shaking your head, wow, I didn't realize that, or I didn't know that.
You talked about the unlearning of a lot of the conventional wisdom that you had. Make no mistake about it. Ali was reviled at some point in his career. How did it get so turned around that seemingly globally he was embraced?
Let's just retrace our steps, JB, for a second. He's bragging, he's, loud, he's spouting poetry, he's predicting which round. This is not the way an athlete, and God forbid a black athlete, should behave. Strike one. Wins the championship against Sonny Liston, improbably. It's a Shakespearean story just within that fight. And then he announces that he's been a member of the Nation of Islam, and not too much later, they bestow on him a new name, Muhammad Ali. Nobody else wants to use that. His opponents don't want to use it. Howard Cosell initially doesn't want to use it. Years later, the newspapers are still saying Clay, they won't honor him. That's strike two. Then when he refuses induction into the draft during the Vietnam War, that is strike three. And we're not just talking about white people, we're talking about black people too. They took a faith-based decision, conscientious objector status, and turned it into a political thing, as if this black man was giving a middle finger to America. And ironically, paradoxically, they turn him into a political figure, because when he can't earn his living with his fists, he goes out on the speaking circuit and he becomes a spokesman for the anti-war movement on college campuses. His audience grows. All his life, he carried forth this message of love, even when he's spouting the separatist rhetoric of Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. He's still this person who has got an inner light, who knows from a very early age, before he picked up a boxing glove, that he was destined for something. He understood he had 3 glaring flaws, and at the end of his life, he really tried to atone and address them. 1, he was unfaithful to 3 of his 4 wives. He said, I fit my religion to fit my habits, and that was wrong. He said, I shouldn't have said those things I said about Joe Frazier, and he reached out and apologized to Joe Frazier. And he also said I shouldn't have moved away from Malcolm X, who had been his friend, dear friend, and mentor when Elijah Muhammad, the head of the Nation of Islam, kicked out Malcolm X, and then later he was murdered by the members of the Nation of Islam. So I think he realized, Malcolm was way ahead of me, and I was ordered to distance myself from him, and I did. And his reward was to get this new name, Muhammad Ali, but I think he really regretted that. This is not a fixed person. This is a person working on himself his entire life, and that active engagement with his own flaws as well as his own strengths makes this story transcendent. It's not about boxing. It's not even about an American. It's a utterly American story, but it's a human story at the highest level of achievement, of tragedy, of aspiration, of defeat, of all of the things that make up the human struggle, the human dynamic.